My name is Cassandra, and I'm a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Seattle. I never imagined I'd be standing in court watching my husband James, his controlling mother Eleanor, and his secret lover Natalie laughing at me as I fought for what was rightfully mine. Their mocking laughter echoed through the courtroom as I presented my case until Judge Freeman silenced them all with a single commanding statement that changed everything. If you've ever felt humiliated, betrayed, or powerless, my story might resonate with you. Before I begin sharing my journey, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment your location below so I can connect with you as I reveal how justice was finally served in the most unexpected way. I've been teaching third grade at Lakeside Elementary for 8 years now. I love my job and my students. Their innocent curiosity and eagerness to learn always brightened my days, even during the darkest times of my marriage. Teaching was my calling, something I knew I wanted to do since I was a child myself. I met James Whitfield at my college roommate's wedding. He was the best man, and I was a bridesmaid. We locked eyes across the venue during the ceremony, and he made his way over to me at the reception. James was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my work as a teacher. He wasn't dismissive like some men I'd dated who considered teaching a cute job rather than a serious profession. Teaching third grade must take incredible patience and creativity, he said during our first conversation. I work with numbers all day as a financial advisor, but you work with actual young minds. That's impressive. I was immediately drawn to him. James worked at Alderman and Brooks, a prestigious investment firm downtown. He had a way of explaining complex financial concepts that made them accessible without being condescending. Our connection deepened when we discovered our shared love of hiking the Pacific Northwest trails, dreams of traveling to national parks, and hopes of starting a family someday. I want a partner, not just a spouse, James told me on our third date as we watched the sunset from Cary Park. Someone to build a life with, to travel with, to raise children with. His words seemed so sincere, his blue eyes earnest as he held my hand. I believed him completely. After 6 months of dating, James took me to meet his family. His father had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving his mother Eleanor as the matriarch of the Whitfield family. Their home in the affluent Madison Park neighborhood overlooked Lake Washington and exuded old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork, antique furniture. It was like walking into a different world from my modest apartment. Eleanor Whitfield greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored St. John's suit, her silver hair and a perfect bob pearl necklace gleaming at her throat. "So you're the teacher James has been spending time with," she said, looking me up and down. I had hoped his interests might align more with his professional circles, but he's always had an independent streak. James squeezed my hand. Mom Cassandra is brilliant. Her students' test scores are consistently the highest in her school. How nice, Eleanor replied. I suppose that's important in public education. Throughout the dinner, Eleanor peppered me with questions about my family middle class, my father, a plumber, my mother, a nurse, my education, state university, not Ivy League, and my career aspirations continuing in education, perhaps becoming a curriculum specialist. With each answer, her slight grimace revealed her disappointment. James defended me throughout the evening, but I noticed he never directly challenged his mother's thinly veiled criticisms. He would redirect the conversation or highlight my accomplishments, but always stopped short of telling her to stop her judgmental comments. It was my first glimpse of their complex relationship. He loved his mother, respected her opinions, and ultimately deferred to her in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Despite Eleanor's cool reception, James and I continued dating. He proposed a year later during a weekend trip to Orcas Island with a beautiful diamond ring. It was my grandmother's, he explained. Mom insisted you should have it as a welcome to the family. I was touched by the gesture, thinking perhaps Eleanor was warming to me. I later learned she had wanted to sell the ring and only gave it to James for me after he threatened not to propose otherwise. We planned our wedding together. James claimed he wanted me to have whatever I wanted, but subtly steered me toward choices his mother would approve of. We compromised on many elements: a garden ceremony at a historic estate rather than the cathedral Eleanor preferred, a guest list of 150 instead of the 300. Eleanor wanted to invite a string quartet instead of the full orchestra. I thought we were making these decisions together, and in retrospect, I see how he was balancing my wishes against his mother's expectations. The wedding day itself was beautiful, if somewhat tense. Eleanor complained about the flowers, the catering, the photography, all arrangements she considered too simple for a Whitfield wedding. But when James saw me walking down the aisle, the look of love in his eyes made everything else fade away. After a 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii, we returned to Seattle to begin our married life. James suggested we move into the family's second home in Queen Anne, just 15 minutes from Eleanor's Madison Park residence. "It makes financial sense," he explained. "We can live there mortgage-free and save for our own place." The arrangement seemed practical, though I had reservations about living in a home owned by the Whitfield Family Trust. The house was beautiful, a restored craftsman with 4 bedrooms and a view of the Space Needle, but I never felt it was truly ours. Eleanor had a key for emergencies and would often drop by unannounced to check on her property. Despite Eleanor's frequent intrusions, our first 2 years of marriage were genuinely happy. James was attentive and loving. We hiked on weekends, hosted small dinner parties, and talked about starting a family. James was rising quickly at Alderman and Brooks, becoming one of their top advisors with a growing client list of Seattle's wealthy elite. His hours grew longer as his responsibilities increased, but he always made time for us. I continued teaching at Lakeside, loving my work with the children. James supported my career, attending school functions and helping me prepare classroom materials on weekends. We were building the life we had talked about, and I felt secure in our future together. "We'll try for a baby next year," James promised on our second anniversary. "Once I make senior advisor." I believed him. I believed in us. I had no idea how quickly everything was about to change. The first signs of trouble were subtle. James started coming home later and later, often past 9 or 10 at night. His phone would ring during dinner, and he'd step away to take calls in private. Weekend hikes became less frequent, replaced by emergency client meetings or golf games with colleagues and clients. "It's just temporary," James would assure me. "This new client portfolio is demanding, but once it's established, things will calm down." I tried to be understanding. Financial advising at his level was demanding, especially as he was being considered for a senior position. But weeks turned into months with no improvement in his schedule. Business trips became more frequent as well. What used to be quarterly overnight trips to Portland or Vancouver became weekly jaunts to San Francisco, Los Angeles, even New York. The distance between us grew with each return flight. "How was your trip?" I'd ask. "Fine, busy, productive." James would reply, his answers becoming increasingly terse and vague. When I'd try to share stories about my students or ask more detailed questions about his work, he'd cut me off with complaints about being tired or needing to prepare for the next day. Our conversations became superficial, focused on household logistics, rather than connecting emotionally. Eleanor, meanwhile, increased her presence in our lives. Sunday dinners at her house became mandatory weekly events, no excuses accepted. She'd call James daily, sometimes multiple times, to discuss family investments, social obligations, and increasingly me. "Cassandra seems tired lately," she'd say to James while I was within earshot. "Teaching must be so draining. Perhaps she should consider a part-time position if you're planning for children soon." Or, "Does Cassandra always dress so casually for dinner parties? The Richardsons mentioned it after last week's gathering." James never defended me during these critiques. Instead, he'd later suggest I might want to consider his mother's advice. "She means well," he'd insist. "She just wants what's best for the family." I began noticing James and Eleanor having private conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. They'd exchange glances, change the subject, or suddenly need to check something elsewhere in the house. When I asked about these secretive discussions, James dismissed my concerns. "Just boring family business stuff," he'd say. "Trust fund details. Nothing you'd be interested in." But my suspicions grew when I found receipts for expensive items I'd never received: a Tiffany bracelet dinner at Canlis, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, on nights James claimed to be working late, a weekend stay at a luxury resort in Napa Valley, during what was supposedly a conference in San Francisco. When I confronted him, James had ready explanations. The bracelet was for his assistant's 10-year work anniversary. The dinner was with important clients. The resort was a company retreat that had been scheduled at the last minute. Each explanation seemed plausible on its own, but together they formed a pattern that gnawed at me. Still, I tried to believe him. I wanted to believe him. Strange calls became more frequent, calls that James would take in private or ignore completely when I was nearby. His phone was suddenly password protected, though he claimed it was a new company security policy. He became irritable if I entered his home office without knocking, quickly minimizing screens or putting papers away. "I'm working with confidential client information," he'd snap. "You can't just barge in." I tried harder to make our marriage work. I prepared special meals for when he came home, planned weekend getaways that he'd inevitably cancel last minute, bought new lingerie that remained unworn. With each effort met with indifference or irritation, my self-confidence eroded further. Then came the miscarriage. We hadn't been actively trying for a baby yet, but I missed a pill, and for a brief few weeks we were expecting. I was thrilled despite the unplanned timing, hoping a baby might bring back the connection we'd lost. James seemed happy too, in his distracted way. When I started bleeding at 10 weeks, James took me to the emergency room but left after an hour, claiming an urgent work situation needed his attention. I called Maya, a fellow teacher and friend, who came immediately to stay with me through the procedure and bring me home. James returned the next morning with flowers but little emotional support. "These things happen," he said awkwardly. "We can try again when the time is right." Eleanor's response was even worse. When she heard about the miscarriage, she sighed and said, "Perhaps it's for the best. First pregnancies are often unsuccessful. Maybe there are some fertility issues you should address before trying again, Cassandra." Her words cut deep, implying the fault lay entirely with me. James said nothing to contradict his mother's assessment. Maya noticed my declining happiness. After school one day, she cornered me in my classroom. "Cass, what's going on? You're not yourself. Is everything okay at home?" I brushed off her concerns at first, unwilling to admit even to myself that my marriage was falling apart. But Maya's genuine concern cracked my facade. "I don't know what's happening with James," I confessed. "He's never home. He's secretive. He doesn't talk to me anymore. And his mother, has he met someone else?" Maya asked gently. I shook my head firmly. "No, James wouldn't do that. He's just ambitious, focused on his career." But Maya's question planted a seed that took root despite my denials. I started paying closer attention to the patterns, the absences, the excuses. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. While cleaning James's car one weekend while he was allegedly at the office, I found an earring wedged between the passenger seat and center console. A diamond stud earring that wasn't mine. I sat in the driveway holding the earring in my palm as my world tilted on its axis. That earring changed everything. I could no longer deny the obvious signs or accept James's increasingly thin explanations. I needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. I began my investigation methodically, starting with our phone records. James and I shared a family plan, and I had access to the online account. Scrolling through months of calls, I found dozens to the same number, often late at night or during his supposed business trips. The calls lasted anywhere from a few minutes to over an hour. Next came the credit card statements. As James's spouse, I was an authorized user on his primary credit card, though I rarely used it. The online statements revealed a pattern that confirmed my worst fears: hotel charges in Seattle on nights he claimed to be working late, restaurant bills, clearly for two people at intimate establishments, jewelry purchases from high-end stores that never made it to my jewelry box. When I carefully broached the subject of these expenses, James had dismissive explanations ready. The hotels were for clients from out of town. The restaurant bills included business associates. The jewelry was for clients' wives as thank you gifts. This is standard practice in my industry, he insisted, irritation clear in his voice. I can't believe you're questioning my professional expenses. Do you want me to explain every coffee I buy? His defensive reaction only deepened my suspicions. One Tuesday evening when James texted he would be working late with an important client, I made a decision. Instead of responding with my usual, "Okay, don't work too hard," I decided to follow him. I felt ridiculous sitting in my car in the parking garage across from his office building waiting to see where he would go. At 7:30 p.m., I watched James exit the building with a tall, elegant woman with long, dark hair. They walked closely together, his hand occasionally resting on the small of her back, a gesture once reserved for me. They strolled 2 blocks to Altura, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants. Through the window, I watched them being seated at a corner table. The intimate lighting cast a warm glow over their faces as they leaned toward each other, laughing and talking with an easy familiarity that twisted something inside me. When the woman reached across the table to touch James's hand, and he turned it over to hold hers, I knew. When he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a tender gesture, I knew. And when they leaned across the table to share a kiss that was clearly not their first, there was no more doubt. I sat frozen in my car for several minutes, tears streaming down my face. Then a strange calm washed over me. I deserved better than this deception. I deserved the truth. I walked into Altura with my head held high, approaching their table directly. The shock on James's face when he saw me would have been comical under different circumstances. "Cassandra, what are you doing here?" he sputtered, dropping the woman's hand immediately. "Apparently interrupting your important client meeting," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your client?" The woman looked between us in confusion. "James, what's happening?" "This is my husband," I told her directly. "And you are?" Her face paled. "I'm Natalie Sanders. I work with James at Alderman and Brooks." "She's a new junior associate," James cut in, standing up. "This is a mentoring dinner, Cassandra. You're making a scene over nothing." "Do you normally kiss your mentees, James?" I asked loudly enough that nearby diners turned to look. "Is that part of Alderman and Brooks' professional development program?" James grabbed my arm. "We need to take this outside, now." In the street, James erupted not with apologies but with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You just humiliated me in front of a colleague and half of Seattle's business elite." "Humiliated you?" I was incredulous. "You're having an affair and you're worried about your humiliation." "Lower your voice," he hissed. "This isn't what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I replied. "How long has this been going on, James?" Natalie had followed us outside and now stood awkwardly to the side. "James, you told me you were separated," she said quietly. I turned to her. "Well, that's news to me." James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Natalie, please go back inside. I need to speak with my wife alone." After she reluctantly returned to the restaurant, James turned on me. "Are you happy now you've ruined my working relationship with a valuable team member because of your insecurities?" His attempt to shift blame onto me was the final straw. "I'm going to Maya's," I told him. "Don't expect me home tonight." When I arrived at our house the next morning to pack some clothes, I was shocked to find Eleanor sitting in our living room as if she owned the place, which technically she did. "James called me last night," she said without preamble. "He told me about your hysterical behavior at Altura." "Hysterical, I caught my husband on a date with another woman." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. Men in James's position often work closely with attractive colleagues. Women like us women who understand the social world James inhabits know to look the other way. "Women like us," I repeated incredulously. "Yes, women who understand what it takes to maintain a position in certain circles. James works hard to provide you with this lifestyle, Cassandra. Perhaps you should focus more on being grateful and less on monitoring his every move." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You knew. You've known all along about Natalie." Eleanor sipped her tea calmly. "Natalie comes from a good family. Her father is on the board at First Sound Bank. She understands the world James operates in." "Unlike me," I said flatly. You said it, dear, not me. Eleanor set down her cup. James is willing to move past this unfortunate incident if you're prepared to behave more appropriately going forward. I stayed at Maya's house for 2 weeks, processing what had happened. James called and texted frequently his messages, alternating between anger at my overreaction and half-hearted apologies followed by promises to end things with Natalie if I would try harder in our marriage. During this time, I discovered through a mutual colleague that James and Natalie's affair had been ongoing for over a year, starting shortly before his business trips increased, and not long after my miscarriage. The timeline made me physically ill. The final breaking point came when I checked our joint savings account money I had contributed to equally from my teaching salary and found it nearly empty. Over $40,000 gone without discussion or notice. That same day, I found text messages on our shared iPad which James had forgotten to unlink from his phone between him and Natalie, discussing their future plans together. They were looking at apartments downtown. They were discussing vacations they would take once I was out of the picture. That afternoon, I called the lawyer Maya had recommended, Jennifer Ross, a divorce attorney, known for handling complex, high-asset cases and for not being intimidated by powerful opponents. Based on what you've told me, we have a strong case, Jennifer Ross said after listening to my story in her downtown Seattle office. Her confidence was reassuring after weeks of gaslighting from James and Eleanor. Jennifer was in her 50s with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and a reputation for being a formidable advocate for her clients. Her office walls displayed multiple awards and recognition from legal associations. Washington is a community property state, she explained. That means all assets acquired during the marriage are typically divided equally regardless of whose name is on the account. Even the house, I asked. It's owned by the Whitfield Family Trust. That's more complicated, Jennifer admitted. But any contributions you made to improvements, mortgage payments, or maintenance could be factored in. And the money he moved from your joint savings, that's a clear attempt to hide marital assets which judges take very seriously. I left Jennifer's office with a comprehensive to-do list. Gather financial records document evidence of the affair, which while not directly impacting asset division could affect other aspects of the case. Photograph valuable items in the home and collect documentation of all assets. When I returned to Maya's that evening, there were 6 missed calls from James. I finally answered on the 7th. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I had appointments," I replied vaguely. "You need to come home, Cassandra. This has gone on long enough. I've ended things with Natalie. We can start fresh." His tone was conciliatory, but I no longer trusted anything he said. "I need more time, James." "Time for what? To punish me. It was a mistake, I admit that. But you're my wife. We took vows." "Vows you didn't seem to remember at Altura." His voice hardened. "If you're not home by the weekend, I'll consider it abandonment of the marriage." "That's not how it works, James." "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath. "It means I've consulted an attorney." The line went silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, "You contacted a lawyer without discussing it with me first. Cassandra, be reasonable. We can work this out without getting attorneys involved." "Like you worked things out with Natalie without involving me." His tone changed instantly, the conciliatory facade dropping away. "If you're determined to make this difficult, fine. But remember who has the resources here. You're a school teacher. I have Whitfield attorneys who've represented our family for 30 years. Over the next few days, I methodically gathered documents. Bank statements showing regular deposits of my teaching salary into our joint account. Credit card statements showing James's expenses with Natalie. Photos of valuable items in the home. The earring I'd found in his car. Screenshots of text messages between James and Natalie. James continued his campaign of manipulation, alternating between threats and reconciliation attempts. He sent flowers to Maya's house with notes begging me to come home. Then when that didn't work, he froze our remaining joint credit card, leaving me with only my modest teacher's checking account. When I went to the house to collect more clothes while James was supposedly at work, I found the locks had been changed. I called Jennifer immediately. That's illegal, she informed me. He cannot lock you out of your marital home. I'll have a locksmith meet us there in an hour with a police escort. When we arrived with a police officer and locksmith, James's car was in the driveway. He opened the door before the locksmith could begin, his face tight with anger. "This is private property," he told the officer. "Sir, this is the marital home, and your wife has equal right to access," the officer replied calmly. "Changing the locks without providing a key to your spouse is against the law." James reluctantly let us in. As I packed more of my belongings, I noticed several items missing, particularly jewelry and small valuables that had been gifts from my parents. "Where's my mother's silver picture frame?" I asked. "And the pearl earrings my father gave me for graduation?" James shrugged. "I haven't touched your things." Jennifer documented the missing items, adding them to our growing file. The next day, Jennifer filed our petition for divorce and temporary orders for financial support and return of my personal property. The temporary orders would be addressed at a hearing in 2 weeks, my first appearance in court, and my first time seeing James in an official capacity since discovering his affair. "Be prepared," Jennifer warned me. "His lawyer will try to paint you as unreasonable, financially naive, or even unstable. They'll minimize the affair and focus on portraying James as the primary breadwinner whose career you're jeopardizing." Sure enough, the response from James's attorney, Harold Blackwell, Eleanor's longtime family lawyer, was dismissive and borderline hostile. He characterized my financial requests as excessive and punitive, and suggested I was emotionally unstable following a regrettable but isolated marital indiscretion. While waiting for the hearing date, I discovered through Jennifer's forensic accountant that James had been transferring money to offshore accounts for months, small amounts at first, then larger sums as his relationship with Natalie progressed. Some transfers had Eleanor's name associated with them as well. I also learned that the prenuptial agreement I had signed, which I remembered as a simple document about James's inheritance, had been substantially altered from the version I'd reviewed. The signed version included clauses severely limiting my rights to any marital property, business interests, or support. "This is potentially invalidating," Jennifer explained. "If you weren't given proper time to review the final document, or if there was any coercion involved, we can challenge its validity." I remembered the night before our wedding signing papers James presented after a champagne dinner with his mother and their family lawyer present. "It's just the standard inheritance protection," James had assured me. "Nothing to worry about." As the hearing approached, Eleanor escalated her campaign against me. She called mutual friends suggesting I was having mental health issues. She contacted the principal at my school expressing concerns about my stability around children. She even showed up at Maya's house demanding to speak with me about ending this nonsense before James's reputation is damaged. Maya stood firm at her door. "Cassandra isn't available, Mrs. Whitfield. I suggest you direct all communication through her attorney." The night before the court hearing, I sat with Maya on her porch, terrified about facing James, Eleanor, and their high-powered attorney. "What if the judge believes them?" I whispered. "They're so confident, so practiced at this." Maya squeezed my hand. "The truth is on your side, Cass. And from what you've told me about Jennifer Ross, she doesn't intimidate easily. Neither should you." I nodded, trying to believe her, but inside I was crumbling. Years of subtle undermining from James and Eleanor had left me doubting my perceptions, my worth, my very right to stand up for myself. "Remember who you were before you met James," Maya said, seeming to read my thoughts. "The Cassandra I met 5 years ago was strong-principled and knew her value. She's still in there." I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. "Yes, she is." Walking into the King County Courthouse the next morning, I felt like I might be sick. Jennifer met me at the entrance, professional and reassuring in a navy suit. "Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge addresses you directly. Answer honestly but concisely, and don't let them provoke an emotional reaction." In the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw them for the first time all together, James in an expensive suit looking confident and collected, Eleanor in a conservative St. John ensemble pearl necklace gleaming, and beside them, to my shock, Natalie dressed modestly but unmistakably present. They huddled with Harold Blackwell occasionally glancing my way and whispering. Once they all laughed softly while looking in my direction, Eleanor covering her mouth delicately with her hand. The message was clear, they were a united front, and I was alone. My stomach clenched, but Jennifer squeezed my arm. Ignore them. They're trying to intimidate you. Judge Harriet Freeman's courtroom was imposing with its dark wood paneling and formal atmosphere. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Freeman entered. She was a black woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and an air of no-nonsense efficiency that was immediately apparent. "Be seated," she instructed, adjusting her glasses to review the file before her. Whitfield via Whitfield petition for dissolution and temporary orders. Let's begin with opening statements. Petitioner first. Jennifer rose smoothly. Your Honor, Cassandra Whitfield is seeking fair and equitable temporary orders during the pendency of this divorce action. After discovering her husband's ongoing extramarital affair with a colleague, Mrs. Whitfield also discovered that substantial marital assets have been diverted to accounts she cannot access. Additionally, she has been illegally locked out of the marital home and denied access to personal property. Judge Freeman nodded, taking notes. Respondent, Harold Blackwell, stood straightening his bow tie. Your Honor, James Whitfield is a respected financial advisor who has provided generously for his wife throughout their marriage. Mrs. Whitfield's claims of financial impropriety are baseless and demonstrate her lack of understanding of complex financial matters. Mr. Whitfield has offered generous terms for temporary support, which Mrs. Whitfield has rejected in favor of pursuing excessive demands. Judge Freeman looked between the attorneys. I'll hear testimony now. Petitioner, call your first witness. Jennifer called me to the stand first. After being sworn in, I sat in the witness box, acutely aware of James, Eleanor, and Natalie watching me from the respondent's table. Mrs. Whitfield, please describe your financial arrangement with your husband during your marriage, Jennifer began. I explained our joint accounts, my teaching salary, our shared expenses, and the recent discovery of missing funds. As I spoke, I heard subtle snickers from the respondent's table whenever I mentioned financial details. And what prompted you to file for divorce? Jennifer continued. After years of growing emotional distance, I discovered my husband was having an affair with Natalie Sanders, a colleague at his firm. When confronted, he was unrepentant and suggested I should accept the situation. I later found text messages indicating they were planning a future together while still married to me. More audible snickering from their table. Judge Freeman glanced in their direction but continued listening to my testimony. And what happened after you separated from your husband? He changed the locks on our home without notice. He froze our joint credit card. Personal items of mine disappeared from the house, and his mother began contacting my employer and friends suggesting I was mentally unstable. During cross-examination, Harold Blackwell was immediately aggressive. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitfield, that you contributed significantly less financially to the marriage than your husband? I contributed my entire teaching salary to our joint accounts. The percentage was smaller than James's income, but I contributed everything I earned. And isn't it true that the house you lived in belongs to the Whitfield Family Trust, not to you personally? Yes, but we lived there as our marital home for 4 years. Did you ever express gratitude to the Whitfield family for allowing you to live in a home worth over $2 million without paying rent? Jennifer objected. Argumentative, Your Honor. Sustained. Judge Freeman agreed. Throughout my testimony, the snickering and whispered comments from James, Eleanor, and Natalie continued. When I described finding the earring in James' car, Eleanor actually rolled her eyes visibly. Next, Jennifer called our forensic accountant, who testified about the money transfers to offshore accounts and the discrepancies in our financial records. During his testimony, James leaned over to whisper something to Natalie that made her cover her mouth to suppress a laugh. Judge Freeman's expression darkened at their behavior, but she allowed the testimony to continue. When it was the respondent's turn, James took the stand, painting a picture of himself as a hard-working provider, married to a woman who didn't appreciate the lifestyle he provided. Cassandra never understood the demands of my career, he testified smoothly. When I worked late or traveled for business, She became suspicious and controlling, checking my phone and questioning my whereabouts. Harold Blackwell led him through a series of questions minimizing his relationship with Natalie. A regrettable lapse in judgment during a difficult period in our marriage, and suggesting I was financially naive. Cassandra never took an interest in our investments or financial planning, preferring to leave those decisions to me. During Jennifer's cross-examination, she presented the credit card statements, showing dinners, hotel stays, and jewelry purchases. Mr. Whitfield, can you explain these charges at the Four Seasons Hotel Seattle on nights you told your wife you were working late? James shifted uncomfortably. Those were for client meetings in the hotel restaurant. That includes the room service charges at 11 p.m. Eleanor chuckled audibly at this, whispering something to Natalie. Judge Freeman glanced sharply in their direction, but continued listening to the testimony. Next came the most surprising witness, Natalie herself, called by Harold Blackwell. She took the stand looking appropriately subdued in a modest navy dress. Ms. Sanders, please describe your professional relationship with Mr. Whitfield. James is a senior advisor at our firm. I joined as a junior associate last year. He mentored me professionally. Our personal relationship developed later and was separate from our work interactions. And did Mr. Whitfield ever indicate he was separated or planning to divorce his wife? Yes, Natalie replied, glancing at me. He told me they were effectively separated, though living in the same house, and that divorce was inevitable due to incompatibility. During Jennifer's cross-examination, Natalie admitted the affair had been ongoing for over a year, and that she had been to the Whitfield home when I was away visiting my parents. And were you aware that Mrs. Whitfield had recently experienced a miscarriage around the time your relationship with Mr. Whitfield became romantic? Natalie looked genuinely surprised. No, I wasn't aware of that. Eleanor chose this moment to make an audible comment to Harold Blackwell, as if that would have made a difference. She couldn't even carry a child properly. This time the comment was loud enough that others in the courtroom heard it. There were murmurs of disapproval, and Judge Freeman looked up sharply. The final witness was Eleanor herself, who testified about the house being Whitfield family property and my supposed difficulties adjusting to the social expectations of their circle. Cassandra never quite understood James's position or the responsibilities that came with it, Eleanor stated primly. She embarrassed him at social functions with inappropriate comments about her students or public education funding. During Eleanor's testimony, she repeatedly referred to me as the teacher, rather than by name, emphasizing the class distinction she perceived between us. The breaking point came during Jennifer's cross-examination of Eleanor regarding the offshore accounts that had her name associated with them. Mrs. Whitfield, can you explain why funds from your son's marital accounts were transferred to offshore accounts, listing you as a beneficial owner? Eleanor straightened her pearls. Those were legitimate family trust transactions that someone of your background wouldn't understand. My background? Jennifer asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, well, people who haven't managed significant family assets often misinterpret standard wealth preservation strategies. As Jennifer presented documentation of the transfers coinciding with the timeline of James and Natalie's affair, I noticed James looking increasingly uncomfortable. Eleanor, however, remained imperious. When Jennifer asked about Eleanor's calls to my principal, the three of them, James, Eleanor, and Natalie, exchanged glances and smirked. Then Eleanor delivered the line that changed everything. Someone needed to warn the school that Cassandra was emotionally unstable. After all, barren women often become unstable when their husbands find more suitable partners. The comment was so shocking, so deliberately cruel, that a collective gasp went through the courtroom. James and Natalie both laughed softly, clearly believing Eleanor's wealth and social position made her untouchable. Judge Freeman's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. That is enough, she declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The courtroom fell instantly silent. Mrs. Whitfield, Eleanor Whitfield, Judge Freeman clarified, removing her glasses. Your comment is not only inappropriate and irrelevant to these proceedings, but it demonstrates a disturbing lack of basic human decency. This is a court of law, not a social club where such behavior is tolerated. Eleanor looked stunned at being addressed this way. Your Honor, I I am not finished, Judge Freeman interrupted. The behavior displayed by you, Mr. Whitfield, and Ms. Sanders throughout these proceedings has been contemptuous, disrespectful, and entirely inappropriate. The constant snickering, eye-rolling, and whispered comments stop now. James attempted to intervene. Your Honor, my mother meant no disrespect to the court. Mr. Whitfield, you would be wise to remain silent at this moment, Judge Freeman advised. I am placing all three of you on notice. One more disruption, one more disrespectful comment or gesture, and I will hold you in contempt of court with appropriate sanctions. She then addressed Eleanor directly again. Mrs. Whitfield, you particularly seem to believe that your social or financial status places you above the standards of behavior expected in my courtroom. Let me assure you it does not. I am issuing you a formal warning. Further disruptions will result in a contempt citation and a fine. The courtroom remained deadly silent. Eleanor's face had flushed red. James looked pale and Natalie stared fixedly at the table in front of her. Judge Freeman then called both attorneys to the bench for a private conversation that lasted several minutes. The whispered exchange was intense with occasional glances toward both parties. When they returned to their tables, Jennifer looked calmly confident while Harold Blackwell appeared distinctly unsettled. In light of testimony and evidence presented today, Judge Freeman announced, I am prepared to rule on the temporary orders, but first I want to make something abundantly clear to all parties. She looked directly at James, Eleanor, and Natalie. This court values truth, equity, and basic human dignity. The behavior I've witnessed today from the respondent's side falls short of those standards. I strongly suggest a recalibration of your approach before we proceed to trial. She then delivered her ruling in a clear, measured tone that left no room for argument. Judge Freeman's ruling was more comprehensive and favorable than I had dared hope for. Based on evidence presented today, I find several matters deeply concerning, she began. First, the prenuptial agreement presented by respondent appears to have significant issues regarding full disclosure and possible coercion. I am setting it aside for purposes of these temporary orders, with final determination reserved for trial. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Judge Freeman continued. Second, the movement of marital funds to offshore accounts coincident with the timeline of Mr. Whitfield's extramarital relationship suggests an attempt to hide assets, something this court views very seriously. She then issued a series of orders of freeze on all accounts, including the recently discovered offshore holdings, temporary maintenance payments to provide me with living expenses, exclusive use of the couple's second property, a small condo downtown that I hadn't even known about for me during the proceedings, and the return of all my personal property within 48 hours. Furthermore, she added, I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of all marital assets to be completed before trial. Both parties will share these costs equally. When she finished, Eleanor stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. That house has been in the Whitfield family for generations. She has no right. Judge Freeman's gavel came down again. Mrs. Whitfield, I warned you about further disruptions. You are now in contempt of court. The bailiff will provide you with the citation and fine of $5,000 payable immediately. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. James grabbed her arm, whispering urgently for her to sit down. Harold Blackwell looked mortified. Your Honor, Blackwell began, on behalf of Mrs. Whitfield, I apologize for the outburst. If we could have a moment to compose ourselves. The court has ruled counsel, Judge Freeman replied firmly. I suggest you advise your clients on appropriate courtroom behavior before our next appearance. As the hearing concluded, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, someone with authority had seen through the Whitfield facade and recognized the manipulation I'd endured. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Eleanor confronted me, her composure completely gone. You think you've won? This isn't over. The Whitfields have friends in every level of Seattle society. By the time we're finished, you won't be able to teach in this state. Security officers noticed the confrontation and moved toward us. Jennifer stepped between Eleanor and me. Mrs. Whitfield, any threats or intimidation will be reported to Judge Freeman immediately. I suggest you leave now. As Eleanor was led away by James and Harold Blackwell, I noticed Natalie slipping away separately, avoiding James's attempts to catch her eye. The united front was already cracking. That evening, James called repeatedly. When I finally answered, his tone had changed dramatically from our previous conversations. "Cassandra, we need to talk reasonably about this," he said, the arrogance gone from his voice. "Today got out of hand. I apologize for my mother's behavior." "Just your mother's?" I asked. He sighed. "Mine too. Look, Harold thinks we should consider mediation instead of going back to court. Judge Freeman clearly has a bias against us." "Against your behavior, James. There's a difference. Whatever you want to call it, we should settle this privately. I can offer very generous terms." I realized he was scared not just of losing money, but of the public exposure of his behavior and financial manipulations. "I'll have Jennifer contact Harold about possible settlement discussions," I said finally. The next day, I received news that Alderman and Brooks had placed James on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Apparently, Judge Freeman's comments about the offshore accounts had triggered concerns about his handling of client funds. Jennifer called with another update. Natalie Sanders has requested a transfer to a different department and has informed Harold Blackwell she will not be participating further in court proceedings. The settlement negotiations began the following week. James appeared without Eleanor, looking significantly humbled. The forensic accountant's preliminary findings had revealed even more extensive financial impropriety than we initially discovered, strengthening my position considerably. In the end, the settlement terms exceeded what I had hoped for half of all marital assets, including those in the offshore accounts' retirement accounts. I hadn't known existed temporary alimony for 3 years, while I pursued a master's degree in educational leadership and a clean break from any Whitfield family properties or obligations. Before signing the final papers, James asked to speak with me privately for a moment. Jennifer was reluctant but agreed to step outside briefly. "I'm sorry, Cassandra," he said quietly once we were alone. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." "Why, James?" "We were happy once. At least I thought we were." He stared at his hands. "My mother, she's always controlled everything. Who I dated, where I worked, how I lived. When I married you, she was furious that I had chosen someone she didn't select. Nothing you did was ever going to be good enough for her. That explains her behavior, not yours." "I know. I was a coward. I let her influence me instead of standing up for you, for us. And then Natalie came along and she was everything my mother wanted. So you chose the path of least resistance." He nodded slowly. "I've lost everything that actually mattered because I couldn't stand up to her. The firm is terminating me. Natalie left as soon as the investigation started. And you? I lost you long before the court hearing." As I watched him sign the divorce papers, I felt no triumph or vindication, just sadness for the years wasted and the family we'd never have. But beneath the sadness was something new: freedom. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days in court. I had moved into a bright, airy condo in the Ballard neighborhood, purchased with my portion of the settlement, and was halfway through my master's program in educational leadership. I had returned to teaching with renewed passion. My third graders at Lakeside Elementary became my anchor during the tumultuous months of the divorce, their innocent enthusiasm for learning reminding me daily of what really mattered. The school community had been incredibly supportive throughout the ordeal. When Eleanor's calls to the principal failed to damage my professional reputation, my colleagues rallied around me. Parents sent supportive notes, and my principal made it clear that my personal situation had no bearing on my excellence as an educator. Using a portion of the settlement funds, I established a small scholarship for children of divorce at Lakeside Elementary. The scholarship helped cover extracurricular activities that might otherwise be sacrificed during family transitions: art classes, sports teams, music lessons, and summer camps. Watching these children continue to thrive, despite their family challenges, became one of my greatest joys. I heard through mutual acquaintances that James had faced serious professional consequences. Alderman and Brooks' investigation had uncovered ethical violations beyond those related to our divorce, resulting in his termination and referral to regulatory authorities. The prestigious career he had prioritized over our marriage was effectively over. His financial situation had deteriorated significantly after paying my settlement legal fees and penalties from the firm. The last I heard, he had moved to Portland to work at a much smaller company, starting over at a lower position. Eleanor's social standing in Seattle had suffered as well. The courtroom behavior witnessed by several prominent community members had circulated through their social circles. Invitations to key events dwindled, and her leadership positions in various charitable organizations were quietly not renewed. Perhaps most surprisingly, I found an unexpected ally in James's younger sister Charlotte, who had been estranged from Eleanor for years and living in California. She reached out after hearing about the divorce through family channels. "I'm not surprised by any of it," she told me over coffee during her visit to Seattle. "Eleanor did the same thing to my marriage. The difference is, I let her win. I divorced Kevin because he wasn't suitable according to Eleanor's standards. I've regretted it ever since." Charlotte shared stories that helped me understand the dysfunctional family dynamics I'd been drawn into, how Eleanor had controlled the family through financial manipulation and emotional domination since her husband's death, how James had been groomed to need her approval above all else. "You're lucky you got out," Charlotte said. "And even luckier you had Judge Freeman. Not everyone gets such a clear moment of justice." The path to emotional recovery wasn't linear. I worked with a therapist specializing in divorce recovery. I joined a support group for women navigating high-conflict divorces. I reconnected with friends I drifted away from during my marriage. Gradually, the anxiety dreams decreased. The knot in my stomach when I drove past Whitfield family properties loosened. The reflexive apologies for things that weren't my fault became less frequent. 6 months after the divorce, I agreed to have coffee with David, a science teacher at a neighboring school. The coffee led to lunch to dinner, and eventually to a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. David had been through his own divorce years earlier and understood the caution with which I approached dating again. "No rush," he assured me. "We've both learned the hard way that foundations matter." One unexpected outcome of my experience was being invited to speak at a workshop on women's legal rights hosted by a local community college. The attorney organizing the event had been in Judge Freeman's courtroom during my hearing and thought my story might help other women facing similar situations. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of women who might be where I was 2 years ago, confused, intimidated, doubting themselves, I found my voice. The most important thing I learned, I told them, is that your worth isn't determined by someone else's perception. Not your husband's, not his family's, not society's. Justice is possible, but first you have to believe you deserve it. More speaking invitations followed. I wrote an article for an education journal about supporting children through family transitions, drawing on both my professional expertise and personal experience. Helping other women navigate situations similar to mine became an unexpected passion. On the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, Maya organized a celebration at her house with friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. As we raised glasses of champagne, she made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. To Cassandra, who reminded us all what courage looks like, who showed us that sometimes the happiest ending isn't staying together, but finding yourself again. Later that week, I received a handwritten note from Judge Harriet Freeman. "Mrs. Johnson," it began using my restored maiden name, "a colleague informed me of your recent speaking engagements helping women understand their legal rights. While judges rarely follow up on cases past their rulings, I wanted to express my admiration for how you've transformed a difficult experience into a mission to help others. The dignity you displayed in my courtroom continues to serve you well. Respectfully, Judge Harriet Freeman." I framed the note and hung it in my home office, a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, could still arrive when you least expected it. The journey from being laughed at in court to rebuilding a life of purpose and joy had been longer and harder than I could have imagined. But standing on the other side, I wouldn't trade the wisdom gained, the authentic relationships formed, or the strength discovered for anything, not even for the illusion of perfection I once thought I had. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when others tried to diminish you? How did you find your courage? I hope my story has shown that even when powerful people try to silence or belittle you, your truth matters. If my experience resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the moment they try to silence you is exactly when you need to speak up loudest.